From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
Today's Republican Party, I think, is the most dangerous organization in human history. Literally, it is racing towards destruction, openly.
Today, an hour with Noam Chomsky on the first 75 days of President Donald Trump. We'll speak about the expanding U.S. wars in the Middle East, China, the climate deniers running the White House, and Chomsky's fear over a new nuclear arms race.
The other crucial issue in human life, issue of survival, existential issue, is nuclear weapons. Trump's positions on this have been all over the map, so it's very hard to know exactly what he means, but some of them are pretty frightening.
We'll also speak with Professor Noam Chomsky about his new book, Requiem for the American Dream, the 10 Principles of Concentration of Wealth and Power. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. The British-based monitoring group, the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, reports dozens of people have been killed and more than 200 wounded in a suspected chemical weapons attack in the rebel-held town in Idlib province in northwest Syria. The observatory reports at least 11 children under the age of 8 were killed in the attack. AFP is reporting a few hours after the alleged gas attack, a rocket hit a nearby hospital where victims were being treated. The observatory says it does not know whether the attack was carried out by the Syrian government or its ally Russia. The Syrian government has denied using chemical weapons during the 6-year conflict, although the UN says the Syrian government used the chemical weapons at least 3 times in 2014 and 15. While speaking at the United Nations Monday, U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley, said the U.S. does not think the Syrian people want to be ruled by President Assad any longer, though on Friday she said, quote, "Our priority is no longer to sit there and focus on getting Assad out." The Washington Post is reporting Blackwater founder Eric Prince secretly met with a Russian close to Russian President Vladimir Putin in efforts to establish a secret back channel between Trump and Putin in the days before Trump's inauguration. The meeting was reportedly held in the Seychelles and was arranged by high-ranking Emirati officials. The article says Prince represented himself as an unofficial representative for Trump. Unnamed U.S. officials told the Washington Post the FBI is looking into the Seychelles meeting as part of its investigation over whether the Trump campaign colluded with Russia in efforts to influence the 2016 election. The White House denies Prince was an unofficial envoy for Trump and says Prince had no official role within the transition team. However, Prince has ties to both Trump's chief strategist, Steve Bannon, as well as to Trump's education secretary, Betsy DeVos, who is Prince's sister. Citing unnamed officials, the Washington Post reports Prince was frequently referenced in internal Trump transition team conversations, suggesting he acted as a form of outside advisor. Prince also donated $250,000 to elect Donald Trump. Prince is the founder of the now-defunct private paramilitary company Blackwater, whose guards were convicted of killing civilians in Iraq and Nisour Square in 2007. On Capitol Hill, the Senate Judiciary Committee voted 11-9 in a straight-party vote to send the nomination of Neil Gorsuch for the Supreme Court justice to the full Senate floor. Democrats say they have enough votes to filibuster Gorsuch's nomination. The full Senate is expected to vote on Friday. Republicans have threatened to invoke the so-called nuclear option to push through Gorsuch's confirmation. This means Republicans would change Senate rules to allow confirmation with a bare majority of senators rather than the 60 now needed to overcome a filibuster. President Trump praised Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi during a meeting at the White House Monday, saying the two leaders agree on so many things.
It's great to be with the President of Egypt, and I will tell you, President al-Sisi has been somebody that's been very close to me from the first time I met him. We agree on so many things. I just want to let everybody know, in case there was any doubt, that we are very much behind President al-Sisi. He's done a fantastic job in a very difficult situation.
Human rights groups say Sisi and his security forces have arrested tens of thousands of Egyptians and have committed torture, forced disappearances, and extrajudicial killings. Protesters gathered near the White House Monday to protest the meeting, holding signs calling Sisi a war criminal. President Trump's son-in-law and senior advisor, Jared Kushner, met with Iraqi Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi in Iraq on Monday amidst the ongoing U.S. and Iraqi military's battle to retake the city of Mosul from ISIS. The journalistic monitoring group Air Wars says U.S.-led coalition airstrikes reportedly killed hundreds of civilians in Mosul last month, including a single airstrike on March 17th that killed up to 200 civilians. The U.S. also has thousands of on-the-ground troops in Iraq, although it's becoming harder to track their numbers and movements. Last week, a Pentagon spokesperson announced that, unlike under the Obama administration, the U.S. will no longer announce or confirm the deployments of conventional U.S. troops in Iraq and Syria. Jared Kushner, Donald Trump's son-in-law, went to Iraq before the Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, has. Meanwhile, President Trump has signed a directive classifying parts of Somalia as areas of active hostilities, meaning the Pentagon now has more power to carry out airstrikes and ground raids in the region. The new classification also means the Pentagon will have more permission to kill civilian bystanders. Trump also declared parts of Yemen areas of active hostilities last month. In Russia, authorities say at least 14 people were killed and dozens more wounded in a bombing on a metro station in St. Petersburg Monday. Kyrgyzstan authorities identified the attacker as 22-year-old Akbarzhan Jalalilov, who was born in Kyrgyzstan and had Russian citizenship. Authorities say a second bomb, which was disguised as a fire extinguisher, was placed at another station but was disarmed before it exploded. St. Petersburg residents gathered Monday to mourn the victims of the blast and call for peace.
I really hope that such events will help all of us, not only people in Russia, but around the whole world, to understand that we should remain human, to encourage humanity inside ourselves, not being animalistic, and not to treat each other like wild animals.
Back in the United States, Fox News continues to be rocked by accusations of sexual harassment. On Monday, Fox News contributor Julie Roginski sued former Fox chair Roger Ailes for repeatedly sexually harassing her, then retaliating against her professionally after she rejected his unwanted advances. In the suit, Roginski says Fox also pressured her to publicly support Ailes after he was accused of sexual harassment by former Fox News anchor Gretchen Carlson. Roginski said she refused, telling a colleague Ailes was, quote, a sexual predator and that she would not join in the smearing of Gretchen Carlson, unquote. Also on Monday, TV commentator Dr. Wendy Walsh came forward to accuse Fox News star Bill O'Reilly of sexually harassing her, then retaliating against her professionally when she rejected him. This is Walsh describing what happened after O'Reilly offered her a job at Fox News over dinner.
So when dinner was finished, he simply said, "Let's get out of here." I assumed he meant that we should move to the bar to continue our conversation about my career at Fox News. And so he caught up with me and said, no, come back to my suite. At that point, you know, I'm a woman of a certain age. I've had situations like this in my life. I knew how to behave. And I simply said, I'm sorry, I can't do that. And he immediately got defensive and said, what do you mean? You think I'm going to attack you or something? And then very soon after, he had the executive producer of the show call me and say that they're going to take a break from the segment for a little while, but they'd start up again later. Well, they did with the other psychologist, but not me, but I knew it was coming.
That was television commentator Dr. Wendy Walsh. Her testimony comes after the New York Times revealed Saturday Fox News and O'Reilly paid out $13 million to 5 other women who have accused O'Reilly of sexual harassment. On Sunday, the Wall Street Journal reported Fox News recently renewed O'Reilly's contract. In response to the revelations, Mercedes-Benz and Hyundai both announced they are pulling current or upcoming ads from the O'Reilly factor. The Jewish-American newspaper The Forward has reported Trump's chief counterterrorism advisor, Sebastian Gorka, publicly supported an anti-Semitic and racist paramilitary militia in 2007 while he served as a Hungarian politician. The militia, known as the Hungarian Guard, was later banned after the European Court of Human Rights accused it of racism. The Forward report draws on a 2007 TV interview in which Gorka expresses his support for the Guards. A previous investigation by The Forward revealed Gorka took a lifelong oath of loyalty to a Hungarian far-right Nazi-allied group. To see our interview with Forward editor Larry Kohler-Esses, go to our website, DemocracyNow.org. Attorney General Jeff Sessions has ordered a wide-ranging review of the federal consent decrees and agreements with dozens of local law enforcement agencies that have been accused of violating civil rights laws. The review signals the Justice Department intends to shift away from monitoring and forcing changes within police departments, such as the Police Department of Ferguson, Missouri, where systematic racial discrimination by the police and the police killing of unarmed 18-year-old African-American Michael Brown sparked an uprising in 2014. This comes as in Utah, a video has emerged of a police officer shooting and killing a man with a man's own gun. The video shows Roy police officers approaching 38-year-old Nicholas Sanchez, who's standing outside a gas station on the 21st of February. He's carrying a gun on his waist. Utah is an open-carry state. The police officers demand he come speak with them, and when he asks why, they threaten to arrest him. When he lifts up his sweatshirt, one officer then lunges at Sanchez, who begins to run away. He's then shot multiple times. The Guardian reports he was shot both by one of the officers using his police gun and by another officer who grabbed Sanchez's gun and shot him with it. The California Senate has passed the so-called sanctuary state bill, which would limit police statewide from cooperating with federal immigration agents in carrying out President Trump's promised mass deportations. Attorney General Jeff Sessions has vowed to withhold federal law enforcement grants to so-called sanctuary cities. The bill, SB 54, now heads to the California State Assembly. To see our full interview with the bill's author, California Senate President Pro Tem Kevin De Leon, go to DemocracyNow.org. Florida Governor Rick Scott has removed Orange Osceola State Attorney Aramis Ayala from about 24 murder cases in an escalating dispute over the death penalty. In March, Ayala announced she would no longer seek the death penalty in any murder cases, including in the case of Markeith Lloyd, who's accused of murdering his pregnant ex-girlfriend, as well as Orlando police officer Deborah Clayton. In response, Scott took Ayala off the case. More than 100 judges, former prosecutors, and legal experts have expressed their support for Ayala, saying Scott has overstepped his legal authority by removing her from cases and saying she has the legal discretion to not seek the death penalty. Aramis Ayala is the first African-American state attorney in Florida history, and she's received racist death threats, including suggestions she should be lynched in the wake of her announcement. To see our interview about Ayala with Angel Harris of the NAACP, go to DemocracyNow.org. In Virginia, the word resist was spray-painted on the grass of the 13th hole at President Trump's National Golf Club over the weekend. It's the second time the Virginia golf course has been the site of anti-Trump protests. In October, ahead of Trump's election, the words Black Lives Matter and No Justice, No Peace were spray-painted on the Trump International Hotel in Washington, D.C. And in New York City, hundreds of artists, librarians, broadcasters, and museum workers gathered at City Hall Monday for a rally aimed at stopping federal cuts to the arts and humanities. President Trump's proposed budget would eliminate funding to the National Endowments for the Arts and Humanities, the Institute of Museum and Library Sciences, and the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. This is New York City Council Speaker Melissa Mark-Viverito.
People who are and appreciate culture and the arts are people that have a greater understanding of the world. That is a threat to this administration.
And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, DemocracyNow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
And I'm Juan Gonzalez. Welcome to all of our listeners and viewers around the country and around the world. 75 days ago today, Donald Trump was sworn in as the 45th President of the United States. On the international front, Trump has expanded U.S. military operations in Iraq, Syria, Yemen, and Somalia, while resuming arms sales to Bahrain. On Monday, he welcomed Egyptian leader General Abdel Fattah al-Sisi at the White House as thousands of activists remain locked up in Egypt. At the United Nations, the Trump administration led a boycott of UN talks to ban nuclear weapons while pushing for the United States to expand its own nuclear arsenal. Trump has also threatened to unilaterally act against North Korea. On the environmental front, Trump picked climate deniers to head the Environmental Protection Agency and the Energy Department while slashing the EPA's programs to combat climate change. Trump's budget calls for an unprecedented $54 billion increase in military spending while ending dozens of environmental, housing, diplomatic, and educational programs. Trump's also requesting a nearly $3 billion increase in funding for the Department of Homeland Security, largely to pay for expanding the border wall and hiring 1,500 new Border Patrol and ICE agents.
However, the Trump agenda has faced some judicial and legislative setbacks. Federal courts have blocked the implementation of 2 travel bans targeting residents from 6 majority Muslim nations. And in Congress, Trump failed in his attempt to repeal Obamacare, which would have stripped up to 24 million people of health insurance while giving the rich a massive tax break. Meanwhile, his administration is facing an FBI probe over its dealings with Russia before the election. This all comes as a resistance movement is growing throughout the country. To help make sense of where the country stands, 75 days into the Trump administration, we're joined by one of the world's best-known dissidents, the linguist and activist Noam Chomsky, Institute Professor Emeritus at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, where he taught for more than 50 years. He's the author of more than 100 books. His latest book comes out today. It's titled Requiem for the American Dream, The 10 Principles of Concentration of Wealth and Power. Noam Chomsky, welcome back to Democracy Now! It's great to have you with us.
Glad to be with you again.
So why don't we start on the 75th day by your assessment of what has happened in these first few months?
Well, I think it was captured pretty well by a Los Angeles Times editorial, which simply called it a train wreck. But it's very consistent, very systematic. Anything that can be of assistance to ordinary people, working people, middle-class people, people on the street. Any such program has to be decimated. Anything that adds to wealth and power or that increases the use of force, that we carry forward. And it's done with this kind of a 2-tiered system working, I presume consciously, so systematic it's hard to question. The Bannon-Trump team wants to make sure that they dominate the headlines. So whatever they do, that's what people look at. And one crazy thing after another, the assumption apparently being you'll forget the old ones by the time the new ones come in. So no one talks anymore about the 3 million illegal immigrants who voted for Clinton. That one we've forgotten. We're on to the next one. Then we'll go on to the next one. While this is going on in front, the Paul Ryan-style budgetary and planning operations are going on quietly in the back, ripping to shreds any element of government that can help people either today or tomorrow. That's the point of the destruction of the environmental system. It's not just the EPA, which was slashed. Most of the environmental programs were actually in the Energy Department, and their research and activist programs were slashed very seriously.
And what do you make in terms of, when you're talking about decimation, clearly one of the big failures was their inability to end Obamacare. Could you talk about what you're seeing now as the potential in terms of the healthcare system in the country, what they will try to do and what the potential is there?
Actually, there was a pretty interesting poll about it that came out a couple days ago, simply asking people what they preferred. The Republican proposal was the lowest of the choices available. I think about 15% of the population were willing to accept it. Somewhat higher was the existing system, so-called Obamacare. And on that, it's worth bearing in mind that a lot of people don't know that Obamacare is the Affordable Care Act. So you have negative attitudes towards Obamacare thanks to lots of propaganda, but more positive attitudes towards the Affordable Care Act because of what people see. Most popular of all, over half, was so-called public option, a government-guaranteed health care program, which is pretty remarkable because no one publicly advocates that. But it's been a consistent polling result for decades that when people are asked what they want, they say that's their choice. And in fact, that's about the only proposal that makes any sense. The U.S. Healthcare system is an international scandal. It's roughly twice the per capita costs of comparable countries and some of the worst outcomes, mainly because it's privatized, extremely inefficient, bureaucratized, lots of bill paying, lots of officials, tons of money wasted, healthcare in the hands of profit-seeking institutions, which are not health institutions, of course. And for decades, people have preferred what every other country has in some fashion, either straight national health care or heavily government-regulated health care, like, say, Switzerland. Sometimes the support is astonishingly high. So in the late Reagan years, for example, about 70% of the population thought that guaranteed health care should be a constitutional guarantee because it's such an obvious desideratum. And about 40% thought it already was in the Constitution. The Constitution is just this holy collection of anything reasonable, so it must be there. But it just doesn't matter what people think. When Obama put through his own program, I think support for the public option was almost 2/3, but it was simply dismantled. When this is occasionally this is discussed in the press, so New York Times, others, and they mention it. They say, yes, it's a possibility, but it's called politically impossible, which is correct, which means you can't pass it through the pharmaceutical corporations and financial institutions. That's politically possible in what's called democracy. Sometimes they say lacking political support, meaning from the institutions that really matter. There's kind of this population on the side, but we can dismiss them. Yeah.
Do you think there could be a kind of Nixon in China moment with Trump? He has in the past expressed support for single payer. He's extremely angry right now at the Freedom Caucus. He can't decide which are the villains in this more, the Freedom Caucus or the Democrats. He goes back and forth. Do you think he could sort of throw it all out, or is it going to just go, as we're seeing in these past few days, where it looks like they're going to revive it to what the so-called Freedom Caucus wants?
I think they'll probably revise it. Trump is all over the place. You don't know what he believes. He says almost anything that comes to his mind at 3 a.m. But the people who are really setting the policy in the background, essentially the Ryan ultra-right Republicans, they understand what they're doing. And they want to destroy the aspects of the healthcare system that are beneficial to the general public. That's systematic policies. Probably what will happen is the kind of compromise that's already being discussed with states having the right to opt out of whatever the federal program is, which might satisfy the ultra-right Freedom Caucus, make it even worse than the current Republican proposal.
I wanted to turn
just today, incidentally, once I think Kansas turned down expansion of Medicaid. I mean, anything that's going to help people in need is got to be wiped out.
We're going to break and then come back to this discussion with the world-renowned political dissident, linguist, author, Noam Chomsky. This is Democracy Now! We'll be back with him in a minute.
No one ever feels the light so dim.
Under the Influence by Steady Holiday here on Democracy Now!, DemocracyNow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. Our guest for the hour, Noam Chomsky, world-renowned political dissident, linguist, author, Institute Professor Emeritus at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. His latest book is Requiem for the American Dream, The 10 Principles of Concentration of Wealth and Power. Juan?
Noam Chomsky, I'd like to ask you about something that's been in the news a lot lately. Obviously, all the cable channels, that's all they talk about these days, is the whole situation of Russia's supposed intervention in American elections for a country that's intervened in so many governments and so many elections around the world. That's kind of a strange topic. But I know you've referred to this as a joke. Could you give us your view on what's happening and why there's so much emphasis on this particular issue?
Pretty remarkable fact that, first of all, it is a joke. Half of the world is cracking up in laughter. The United States doesn't just interfere in elections. It overthrows governments it doesn't like, institutes military dictatorships. Simply in the case of Russia alone, it's the least of it. The U.S. government under Clinton intervened quite blatantly and openly. They didn't try to conceal it to get their man Yeltsin in all sorts of ways. So this, as I say, it's turning the United States again into a laughingstock in the world. So why are the Democrats focusing on this? In fact, why are they focusing so much attention on the one element of Trump's programs, which is fairly reasonable, the one ray of light in this gloom, trying to reduce tensions with Russia? The tensions on the Russian border are extremely serious. They could escalate to a major terminal war. Efforts to try to reduce them should be welcomed. A couple of days ago, the former U.S. ambassador to Russia, Jack Matlock, came out and said he just can't believe that so much attention is being paid to apparent efforts by the incoming administration to establish connections with Russia. I said, sure, that's just what they ought to be doing. So meanwhile, this one topic is the primary locus of concern and critique, while meanwhile the policies are proceeding step by step, which are extremely destructive and harmful. So, yeah, maybe the Russians tried to interfere in the election. That's not a major issue. Maybe the people on the Trump campaign were talking to the Russians. Well, okay, not a major point. Certainly less than is being done constantly. And it is a kind of a paradox, I think, that the one issue that seems to inflame the Democratic opposition is the one thing that has some justification and reasonable aspects to it.
Well, of course, because the Democrats feel that that's the reason somehow that they lost the election. Interesting that James Comey this week said he is investigating Trump campaign collusion with Russia, when it was Comey himself who could have might well have been partly responsible for Hillary Clinton's defeat, when he said that he was investigating her, while we now have learned at the same time he was investigating Donald Trump, but never actually said that.
Well, you can understand why the Democratic Party managers want to try to find some blame for the fact, for the way they utterly mishandled the election and blew perfect opportunity to win, handed it over to the opposition. But that's hardly a justification for allowing the Trump policies to slide by quietly, many of them not only harmful to the population, but extremely destructive, like the climate change policies. And meanwhile, focus on one thing that could become a step forward if it was adjusted to move towards serious efforts to reduce growing and dangerous tensions right on the Russian border, where they could blow up. NATO maneuvers are taking place hundreds of yards from the Russian border. The Russian jet planes are buzzing American planes. Something could get out of hand very easily. Both sides, meanwhile, are building up their military forces, adding the U.S. is one thing that the Russians are very much concerned about is the so-called anti-ballistic missile installation that the U.S. is establishing near the Russian border, allegedly to protect Europe from non-existent Iranian missiles. Nobody seriously believes that. This is understood to be a first strike threat. These are serious issues. People like William Perry, who has a distinguished career and is a nuclear strategist and is no alarmist at all, is saying that we're back to this is one of the worst moments of the Cold War, if not worse. That's really serious, and efforts to try to calm that down would be very welcome. And we should bear in mind it's the Russian border. It's not the Mexican border. There's no Warsaw Pact maneuvers going on in Mexico. And that's a border that the Russians are quite reasonably sensitive about. They've practically been destroyed several times last century right through that region.
In line with your concern about the growing threat in terms of nuclear weapons, there are also maneuvers going on off the coast of Korea, and the words that we've heard from President Trump in the last few days that if China doesn't deal with North Korea, the U.S. will. Could you talk about his policies already, his developing policies toward Korea and toward China?
Well, it's kind of interesting to look at the record. The claim is, well, we've tried everything, nothing works, therefore we have to use force. Is it true that nothing's worked? I mean, there is a record, after all. And if you look at the record, it's interesting. 1994, Clinton established what was called the Framework Agreement with North Korea. And North Korea would terminate its efforts to develop nuclear weapons. The U.S. would reduce hostile acts. It more or less worked, and neither side lived up to it totally, but by 2000, North Korea had not proceeded with its nuclear weapons programs. George W. Bush came in and immediately launched an assault on North Korea, acts of evil, sanctions, and so on. North Korea turned to producing nuclear weapons. In 2005, there was an agreement between North Korea and the United States. Pretty sensible agreement. North Korea agreed to terminate its development of nuclear weapons. In return, it called for a non-aggression pact, so stop making hostile threats, relief from harsh sanctions, and provision of a system to provide North Korea with low-enriched uranium for medical and other purposes. That was the proposal. George Bush instantly tore it to shreds. Within days, the U.S. was imposing, trying to disrupt North Korean financial transactions with other countries through Macau and elsewhere. North Korea backed off, started building nuclear weapons again. Maybe you can say it's the worst regime in history, whatever you like, but they have been following a pretty rational tit-for-tat policy. And why are they developing nuclear weapons altogether? I mean, the economy's in bad shape. They could certainly use the resources. Everyone understands that it's a deterrent. And they have a proposal, actually. There's a proposal on the table. China and North Korea proposed that North Korea should terminate its further development of nuclear weapons. In return, the United States should stop carrying out threatening military maneuvers with South Korea right on its border. Not an unreasonable proposal. It's simply dismissed. Actually, Obama dismissed it too. There are possible steps that could be taken to alleviate, which could be an extremely serious crisis. I mean, if the U.S. did decide to use force against North Korea, one immediate reaction, according to the military sources available to us, is that Seoul, the city of Seoul, would simply be wiped out by mass North Korean artillery aimed at it, and who knows where it would go from there. But the opportunity to move towards a negotiated diplomatic settlement does not seem outlandish. I mean, this Chinese-North Korean proposal is certainly worth serious consideration, I would think. And it's worth bearing in mind that North Korea has some memories. They were practically destroyed by some of the most intensive bombing in history. The bombing, it's worth reading. Maybe you should read people the official Air Force history of the bombing of North Korea. It's shattering. I mean, they had flattened the country. There were no targets left. So therefore they decided, well, we'll attack the dams, which is a war crime, of course. And the description of the attack on the dams is, without the exact wording, I hate to paraphrase it, you really read they were simply exulting over in the official histories, Air Force Quarterly and others, about how magnificent it'll be to see this massive flood of water coursing through North Korea, wiping out crops for Asians. The rice crops is their life. This will destroy them. It'll be magnificent. The North Koreans lived through that, and having nuclear-capable B-52s flying on their border is not a joke. But most significantly, there's a record of partial success in diplomatic initiatives, total failure with sanctions and harsh moves, and options that are on the table which could be pursued. Now, instead of concern about whether somebody talked to the Russians, this is the kind of thing that should be pursued very seriously. That's what the Democrats or anyone hoping for some form of peace and justice should be working for.
Which brings us to China. President Trump said, if China is not going to solve North Korea, we will. Are you concerned that with Trump at an all-time low for presidents when it comes to popularity, with suffering defeat after defeat, lashing out and trying to focus on a foreign enemy? But at the same time, you have China coming to the United States, this meeting that he's going to have with the Chinese leader, Xi, in Mar-a-Lago. Also very interesting, considering it's a golf course. He hates golf, and forbade Communist Party members to play golf. Is it more about Trump feeling he has more access to shut down press coverage or any information about who's meeting with him when it's in his private resort, but more importantly, what the agenda is there and what our relationship is with China?
Well, as you recall, one of the interesting incidents was a public discussion of significant security issues in the resort, with people sitting around drinking coffee and having drinks. Maybe they keep the press out, but they didn't seem to keep the guests out.
Well, not if you pay $200,000 a year and you're a member of Mar-a-Lago.
Then you pass through the filter.
And then you get to take photos, selfies with the man carrying the nuclear codes, the little football.
He's extremely unpredictable. But the relations with China are an extremely serious issue. China's not going to back down on its fundamental demands concerning Taiwan, for example. And if Trump, a lot of what China's demanding, I think, is not acceptable. It's not internationally acceptable. But the reaction through use of force is just extraordinarily dangerous. I mean, you cannot play that game in international affairs. We are too close to destroying ourselves. You take a look at the record of through the nuclear age of accidental, sometimes kind of irrational actions. It's almost miraculous that we've survived. And anything that to get a good estimate of this, of the danger, take a look at the best monitor of the global security situation that we have as a simple measure, namely the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists' Doomsday Clock. This is set every year since the beginning of the nuclear age, 1947, by a group of serious specialists, scientists, political analysts, and others who try to give a measure of the danger that the human species faces. Midnight means we're finished. In 1947, the clock was set at 7 minutes to midnight. In 1953, right after the U.S. and Russia tested hydrogen bombs, thermonuclear weapons, it went to 2 minutes to midnight. That's the closest it's been to total disaster. Right now, as soon as Trump came in, it was moved to 2.5 minutes to midnight, both because of the nuclear threat, recognized to be serious, and the threat of environmental catastrophe, which was not considered in the earlier years, now is. Those are the overwhelmingly the most crucial issues that face us. Everything else fades into insignificance in comparison to them. Those are literally questions of survival. And 2.5 minutes to midnight means extraordinary danger. These should be the major focus of attention. And it's kind of astonishing to see the way they're ignored throughout the whole electoral campaign. Practically no mention of them. Every Republican candidate, every single one, either with regard to the climate, either denied what is happening or else said the moderates, like Jeb Bush, Kasich, said, well, maybe it's happening, but it doesn't matter. We shouldn't do anything about it.
Well, the U.S. just led the boycott at the UN of the nuclear ban talks.
Nuclear ban, it joined it with the other nuclear powers, unfortunately. There's also the question of the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty. There are now 3 nuclear powers which have refused to ratify it, China, the United States, and Israel. And if tests begin again, it's an extremely serious danger. As I mentioned, it was when the first tests were carried out that the doomsday clock went to 2 minutes to midnight. There's the problem of the New START treaty, a treaty that there has been inadequate but significant reduction in nuclear weapons since the end of the Cold War. The New START treaty is supposed to carry it forward. Russia and the United States have overwhelming mass of the nuclear weapons, and this would cut down the number, but also the more threatening ones would reduce it. Trump has indicated, I don't know, nobody knows what he means, but he's indicated that is what he calls a bad deal for the United States, suggesting maybe we should pull out of it, which would be a disaster. I mean, these are major issues, and the fact that they're barely being discussed is a shattering commentary on the level of contemporary civilization.
We're speaking with Noam Chomsky, world-renowned political dissident, linguist, and author, professor emeritus at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, where he's taught for more than 50 years. He has a new book out today. It's called Requiem for the American Dream, the 10 Principles of Concentration, Wealth, the 10 Principles of Concentration of Wealth and Power. We'll be back with him in a minute.
Little Richard for a Saturday night. James Brown if you're feeling out of sight. soft revolution.
Noam Chomsky is a soft revolution by Foy Vance. This is Democracy Now!, DemocracyNow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez, and yes, our guest for the hour is Noam Chomsky, the world-renowned political dissident, linguist, and author. His latest book is Requiem for the American Dream, The 10 Principles of Concentration of Wealth and Power. Juan?
Well, Noam Chomsky, I wanted to ask you, those on the left are accustomed to looking at the American government basically as in the service of the capitalist class, the politicians. Occasionally you had a Rockefeller or actually a member of the capitalist class who went into government. But now with this Trump administration, it's an extraordinary number of extremely wealthy people have actually moved directly into government. And yet you're seeing this narrative that they are attracting support from the white working class of the country. Could you talk about this, the capitalists directly taking over the running of government?
Well, as you say, they run it all the time. Simple measures like campaign funding alone, simple measure like that, is a very close predictor, not only of electoral victory, but even of policies. That's been true for a century. If you take a look at the analysis of public attitude, a major topic in academic political science is comparing popular attitudes with public policy. It's pretty straightforward. Public policy, you can see popular attitudes we know a lot about from extensive polling. And the results are pretty startling. It turns out that about 70% of voters, which is maybe half the electorate, about 70% of voters are literally disenfranchised, the lower 70% on the income scale, meaning that their own representatives pay no attention to their attitudes and preferences. If you move up the income scale, you get a little more correlation, a little more influence. The very top, which is probably a fraction of 1% if you could get the data, that's where policy is set. Now, the Trump administration is kind of a caricature of this. It's always pretty much true, but here it's as if they're kind of purposely trying to flaunt the fact that this country is run by Goldman Sachs and billionaires, and nobody else counts.
Wilbur Ross, Betsy DeVos,
all of them. I mean, it's almost like a shocking parody, as if they're trying to show, what we all know is true is dramatically true, and we're going to show it to you. An interesting question, the one you raise, is how are they maintaining support among the people they're kicking in the face? That's not uninteresting. And if you look into it, there's a number of factors. One fact, first of all, many of the Trump voters, white working class voters, quite a few of them voted for Obama in 2008. You go back to the Obama campaign, the exciting words were hope and change. I don't usually agree with Sarah Palin, but when she asked where's this hopey changey stuff, she wasn't talking nonsense. It quickly became clear there's no hope and there's no change, and working people were significantly disillusioned. You could see it right in Massachusetts, where when Kennedy died, the liberal lion, there was going to be a vote to replace him in 2010. Amazingly, a Republican won in Democratic Massachusetts Kennedy seat, and Union voters didn't vote for the Democrats. They were very upset by the fact that they had been cheated, they felt rightly, by the Obama campaign of promises. And they turned to their bitter class enemy, who at least talks the words. The Republicans have mastered the technique of talking words as if you're sort of an ordinary guy, kind of guy you'd meet in a bar, that sort of thing. It goes back to Reagan and his jelly beans, and Bush, mispronouncing words, and so on and so forth. It's a game that's played, and it's a con game, but in the absence of any opposition, it works. And what happens when there is an opposition? That's very striking. The most astonishing fact about the last election, which is the Sanders achievements, that's a break from a century of American political history. As I said, you can pretty well predict electoral outcomes simply by campaign funding alone. There's other factors that intensify it. Here comes Sanders, somebody nobody ever heard of, no support from the wealthy, no support from corporations. The media ignored or disparaged him. He even used a scare word, socialist, came from nowhere. He would have won the Democratic Party nomination if it hadn't been for the shenanigans of the Obama-Clinton party managers who kept him out, might have been president, from nothing. That's an incredible break. It shows what can happen when policies are proposed that do meet the general just concerns of much of the population.
Do you think he could still win if he ran again?
Well, there was a Fox News poll a couple of days ago, Fox News, asking trying to ask who's your favorite political figure. Sanders was way ahead, far ahead of anybody else, with no vocal, articulate support among the concentrations of power, media, corporations, elsewhere. In fact, if you look at policy preferences, you see something similar. We already mentioned the health issue. And on issue after issue, much of the public that is actually voting for their bitter class enemy, if you look at the policies, actually favor social democratic policies, even environmental policies.
We've had hundreds of questions come in from every means to ask you. One of them is Ty Williams, who asked via Twitter about Trump exploiting fear. Ty asked, could you please expand on your comments on Alternet that Trump administration could stage an attack? What historical parallel do you have in mind?
Well, actually, the statement I made was pretty muted. It wasn't quite as strong as the headlines indicated. What I pointed out, and what everyone I think is aware of, is that sooner or later, this con game is not going to work. People will understand he's not bringing back jobs. He's not going to recreate the partly illusory, partly real picture of what life was like in the past with manufacturing jobs and a functioning society, and you could get ahead and so on and so forth. He's not going to create that. What happens at that point? Something has to be done to maintain control. The obvious technique is scapegoating. So blame it on immigrants, on Muslims, on somebody. But that can only go so far. The next step would be, as I said, an alleged terrorist attack, which is quite easy, in fact almost normal, like Condoleezza Rice's mushroom clouds. That's easy to construct, alleged attacks. The other possibility is a staged attack of a minor kind. And how hard would that be? Take the FBI technique, which they're using constantly, of creating situations of entrapment. Well, suppose one of them goes a little too far. You don't stop it right in time. That wouldn't be hard to work out. I don't particularly anticipate it, but it's a possibility. And this is a very frightened country. For years, this has been probably the most frightened country in the world. It's also the safest country in the world. It's very easy to terrify people.
No.
I wanted to ask you another question that came in from Melbourne, Australia, Aaron Brilla. He said Defense Secretary James Mattis this week described Iran as the greatest threat to the United States. My question, why does the U.S. insist on setting the potential grounds for war with Iran?
That's been going on for years. Right through the Obama years, Iran was regarded as the greatest threat to world peace. And that's repeated over and over. All options are open, Obama's phrase, meaning if we want to use nuclear weapons, we can because of this terrible danger to peace. Actually, there's a few interesting comments that should be made about this. One is there also is something called world opinion. What does the world think is the greatest threat to world peace? Well, we know that from U.S.-run polls, Gallup polls. United States, nobody even close, far ahead of any other threat. Pakistan, second, much lower. Iran, hardly mentioned. Why is Iran regarded here as the greatest threat to world peace? Well, we have an authoritative answer to that from the intelligence community, which provides regular assessments to Congress on the global strategic situation. And a couple of years ago, their report, of course, they always discuss Iran, and the reports are pretty consistent. They say Iran has very low military spending, even by the standards of the region, much lower than Saudi Arabia, Israel, others. Its strategy is defensive. They want to deter attacks long enough for diplomacy to be entertained. The conclusion, intelligence conclusion, a couple of years ago, is if they are developing nuclear weapons, which we don't know, but if they are, it would be part of their deterrent strategy. Now, why is the United States and Israel even more so concerned about a deterrent? Who's concerned about a deterrent? Those who want to use force. Those who want to be free to use force are deeply concerned about a potential deterrent. So yes, Iran is the greatest threat to world peace, might deter our use of force.
Today is the 50th anniversary of Dr. King giving his Beyond Vietnam speech at Riverside Church, where he said the United States is the greatest purveyor of violence on earth. Your thoughts today as we wrap up, and if in the last 30 seconds.
Well, that speech by King was very important. Also, other speeches he gave at the same time, which have, at the time, seriously harmed his reputation among liberal Northerners. He sharply condemned the war in Vietnam, which was the worst crime since the Second World War. The other thing he was doing was trying to create a poor people's movement, a non-racially separated poor people's movement.
And we're going to do part 2 of this discussion and post it at DemocracyNow.org. Our guest, Noam Chomsky, will be with him at the First Parish Church in Cambridge on April 24th, and then to Denver this weekend, as well as British Columbia. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. Check the transcript and podcast at DemocracyNow.org.